technology is gradually getting more powerful. And when we invented less powerful tech like fire, we very successfully used the strategy of learning from mistakes. Invented fire, oopsie, and then invented the fire extinguisher. We invented the car, oopsie, and then we invented the seatbelt, the airbag, the traffic light, and things were more or less fine. But when you get beyond a certain point in the power of the technology, this idea of learning from mistakes is just really, really lousy, right? You don't want to make mistakes if one mistake is unacceptably many. And when we talk about nuclear weapons, synthetic biology, and certainly superhuman AI, I feel we're at that point where we really don't want to make mistakes. We want to shift strategy from being reactive to being proactive, which is exactly the slogan you said you're also using for your work here at Google earlier. And I'm optimistic that we can do this if we really focus on it and work for it. Some people say, no, don't talk about this because it's just Luddite scaremongering when you talk about things that could go wrong. I don't think it's Luddite scaremongering. I think it's safety engineering. We started by talking about the Apollo moon mission. You know, when NASA thought through very carefully everything that could possibly go wrong when you put 3 astronauts on top of this 100-meter tall rocket full of highly explosive fuel, that wasn't Luddite scaremongering. What they were doing was precisely what ultimately led to the success of the mission. And this is what I think we want to be doing with AI as well. I think so let's look at quickly at the facts. When nuclear weapons were first built, the decision makers and scientists generally thought that the main risk was that you would literally get blown up by it. And people had these risk assessments that if things went really, really bad, maybe we would kill 300 million people or something like that. Now we know that that's hopelessly naive, and that this is not even, that getting blown up by it isn't even the #1 largest risk to worry about. For example, oops, now this is a photo from downtown Las Vegas in the 60s. You see the mushroom-shaped cloud in the background? That's how close it was to downtown, because people had totally underestimated the dangers of radioactive fallout. And acknowledging that, now the US government has paid out more than $2 billion in damages to settle these downwinder cases, and there have been more people who were killed by fallout from these peacetime nuclear tests than who died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. But that's also not the #1 risk. Looking ahead, what do you think are the technologies that are going to have the greatest impact on society?
So I think there's probably five categories. Yeah. And you know, I'm not even giving a particular order, but making life multiplanetary, achieving sustainable production and consumption of energy. Obviously, the internet as a whole. I mean, the continued growth of the internet. And then potentially, if we do this, reprogramming human genetics, and the fifth one would be artificial intelligence. So, you know, working on the kind of the first 3, but not the last 2. I think, you know, the last 2 I think have the greatest potential to be a double-edged sword.
So when you call artificial intelligence a double-edged sword, can you talk a bit about the positive edge first? What do you see as the greatest benefits we can get from AI?
Well, the greatest benefits from AI would probably be in eliminating drudgery. So, like in terms of or tasks that are mentally boring, not interesting. There's arguably breakthroughs in areas that are currently beyond human intelligence, or at least for now beyond human intelligence. I think we could probably solve them in the long term, such as you know, the classic sort of curing cancer and addressing diseases of aging, Alzheimer's, and all these things. So there's, you know, insert, you know, various like intractable problems to human intelligence, or currently what seem to be intractable problems, and then if you had something that was way smarter, it could solve those problems.
And turning to negative edge, right?
Well, I think it's best to prepare for to try to prevent a negative circumstance from occurring than to wait for it to occur and then be reactive. So, and this is a case where the range of negative outcomes some of them are quite severe. So it's not clear whether we'd be able to recover from some of these negative outcomes. In fact, certainly you can construct scenarios where recovery of human civilization does not occur. And when the risk is that severe, it seems like you should be proactive and not reactive.
I'm really quite curious why you decided to make such a large donation, because 10 million is something that really enables a massive amount of research.
I don't think 10 million is a large amount of money for this subject area. It should probably be higher. But there should be probably some much larger amount of money applied to AI safety in multiple ways.
Most of the people in surveys tend to land more here in the middle in what I've called the beneficial AI movement, where you're really motivated actually to ask what can we do right now to steer things in a good direction, because it could be awesome or it could be not so great, and it depends on what we do now. I put this web page up, ageofai.org, and we did a survey there for people from the general public could answer these same questions. You can go there and do it too. And I was actually very interested that the general public responds almost exactly the same as AI researchers have done in recent polls. This is from something I analyzed this weekend with 14,866 respondents. And you see, most people think maybe we're decades away from human-level AI. Maybe it'll be good, maybe there'll be problems. So this is maximally motivating to think about how we can steer this technology in a good direction. Another item here on this list is principle number 18, the AI arms race. This was the one that had the highest agreement of all among the Tegmark participants. An arms race in lethal autonomous weapons should be avoided. Why is that? Well, first of all, we're not talking about drones which are remote controlled vehicles where a human is still deciding who to kill. We're talking here about systems where the machine itself, using machine learning or whatever, decides exactly who is going to be killed and then does the killing. And first, whatever you think about them, the fact is, although there's been, of course, a huge amount of investment in civilian uses of AI recently, it's actually dwarfed by talk about military spending here recently. So if you look in the pie, there's a real risk that status quo will just mean that most of the loud sucking noise trying to recruit AI graduates from MIT and Stanford and elsewhere will be to go to military places rather than to places like Google. And most AI researchers felt that that would be a great shame. Here's how I think about it. If you look at any science, right, you can always use it to develop new ways of helping people or new ways of harming people. And biologists fought really, really hard to make sure that their science is now known as new ways of curing people rather than for biological weapons. They fought very hard and they got an international ban on biological weapons passed. Similarly, chemists managed to get the chemical weapons banned by really speaking up as a community and persuading politicians around the world that this was good. And that's why you associate chemistry now mainly with new materials, and it's very stigmatized to have bioweapons. So even if some countries cheat on them, it's so stigmatized that Assad even gave up his chemical weapons to not get invaded. And if you want to buy some chemical weapons to do something silly, you're going to find it really hard to find anyone who's going to sell them to you because it's so stigmatized. And what there's very widespread support for in the AI community is exactly the same thing here, to try to negotiate an international treaty where the superpowers get together and say, hey, you know, the main winners of having an out-of-control arms race in AI weapons is not going to be the superpowers. It's going to be ISIS and everybody else who can't afford expensive weapons but would love to have little cheap things that they can use to assassinate anybody with anonymously and basically drive the cost of anonymous assassination down to zero. And this is something that if you want to get involved in, the United Nations is going to discuss this in November, actually. And I think the more vocal the AI community is on this issue, the more likely it is that the AI rocket here is going to veer in the same direction as the biology and chemistry rocket went.